we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to, obviously, a little bit later this first hour, talk about impeachment, but I think you were probably ready for something besides that to start off the program today, so we will postpone that for a few minutes. Speaking of a few minutes, about an hour from now, we're going to have Steve Green with us, who is, of course, the head of Hobby Lobby. We have had, of course, his father, David Green, in studio with us before, as we've talked about his book, Give It All Away. We, of course, had Steve and Jackie Green on more recently talking about the other book that they wrote, and that is this dangerous book all about the Bible. Now, we're going to be talking with him today about this beautiful book. And, of course, we have on a number of occasions around the Millennial Roundtable had his daughter, who is Lauren Green McAfee, as well as the son-in-law, Michael McAfee, on. So these are individuals that will be joined with in about an hour. And then I might just mention in the next hour, Romney Ruder will be with us of Lifeline Global. We're going to come back to this outstanding program that has been developed in some of the prisons, and I hope will go national, to really begin to seriously work on rehabilitation and to reduce recidivism, because some of these individuals come out. Now, a good number of the people that they have worked with over the years, these prisoners, are there for life, but they have been able to earn Bible degrees, seminary degrees, and the rest. And so it's just an incredible program that we'll be talking about. He'll be in studio with us at the 2 o'clock hour. So we've got a lot to cover. But first of all, I thought just might talk about Ellie Goulding. And if you say, who is she? Well, she was scheduled as the NFL halftime singer, who then decided she would not because she felt that the whole idea of the Salvation Army is anti-LGBT and all of the rest. Let me give you the bottom line. She now says she is going to sing, and that is probably something where you could say, well, then it's all over. No, but I think there's about 3 lessons that we can learn from this experience, and so I thought I'd work our way through it. Tony Perkins the other day said, Ellie Goulding, all hat and no kettle. Of course, that's a turn of phrase there, but again, this musician, scheduled to perform on Thanksgiving, threatened to pull out of the show because their spotlighted charity is the Salvation Army. And so she said either give a donation to an LGBT group or she would be out. And it was interesting because that generated a lot of response, including a number that said, well, don't let the arena door hit you on the way out. And that is illustrated by this particular article in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, in which, of course, she threatened to pull out of the Dallas Cowboy event. And so then it goes into some of the things that she said. So let's give her her due on what she actually posted. She says, upon researching this, I have reached out to the Salvation Army and said that I would have no choice but to pull out unless they very quickly make a solid, committed pledge or donation to the LGBTQ community. I'm a committed philanthropist, as you probably know, and my heart has always been in helping the homeless, but supporting an anti-LGBTQ charity is clearly not something I would ever intentionally do. Thank you for drawing my attention to this. Now, the point she's making is that there was somebody that actually made a comment, and again, I'll read this one, that the Salvation Army will let, this is this person's words, not mine, will let queer homeless people die, which caused her to snap to attention very quickly and said that then she would not actually sing if indeed you are going to highlight the Salvation Army. That led to an incredible number of responses. I'll give the Salvation Army one next, but let me give you some of the posts. Tim Carney said, well, if you can't handle the Salvation Army, then you're the totalitarians, which I thought was kind of interesting. Governor Mike Huckabee weighed in and said, easier to get a singer people have heard of than to have the Salvation Army get God to rewrite the Bible. Really arrogant of her to think that she's that indispensable. She isn't. Herman Cain said, whenever was the Salvation Army being tagged as a hate group who is safe? And you've had quite a number of others weighing in with some of those ideas as well. One of the coaches, interesting, not with the Cowboys, but someone else, said the arrogance of the Salvation Army has helped so many people. I have never literally heard of this girl. By the way, I have heard many of her songs, fairly well known, but nevertheless, 32 years of age. Matter of fact, one of her songs was in the 30 Shades or whatever Shades of Grey, and she's got some pop songs that have done very well. She's been nominated for People's Choice Award. But anyway, he was just simply saying, I haven't heard of him. And a lot of people have said that as well. Haven't heard of who this is. And then I love this one. You should have checked out the Salvation Army's beliefs before agreeing to perform. You have no right to demand they change their religious beliefs to suit you. Don't even bother to show up in Dallas. You'll be booed out of the stadium. And that might actually happen, but we'll see where that goes. And to, again, give credit where credit is due, I've worked with people in the Salvation Army before. The national commander said, we'd like to thank Ellie Goulding and her fans for shedding light on misconceptions and encouraging others to learn the truth about the Salvation Army's mission to serve all without discrimination. We applaud her for taking the time to learn about the services we provide to the LGBTQ community. Regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender identity, we're committed to serving anyone in need. Every day we provide services such as shelter for the transgender community and resources for homeless youth, 40% of whom identify as gay or transgender. Ellie's performance in the 23rd Annual Salvation Army Red Kettle Kickoff during the Dallas Cowboy game, Thanksgiving Day on CBS, will kick off a season of giving that helps support these and many other programs and services throughout the country. Very gracious response, which came out before she actually acknowledged that she was going to come back. And in case you were wondering about some of the facts that are being thrown around here, again, our good friends at the Family Research Council point out that there was a very good piece, and I pulled this one out as well, that appeared in the Washington Examiner, pointing out that there actually in the past were some LGBT groups that were wondering about this, and so they took the time to check it out. And what they found is this organization basically said during the intake process, people who are homeless are asked in a sensitive way how they identify and are admitted to the area of the safe harbor facility that aligns with their authentic gender identity. This comes from the Prairie Pride Coalition. They went on to say that given this information and the sincere, earnest efforts by the staff and leadership at our local Salvation Army, we feel comfortable recommending that members of the community support our local Salvation Army, and we urge members of our community, that would be the LGBTQ community, who are homeless or in crisis to seek assistance from Safe Harbor and Salvation Army's other services. This is a very extensive article, which I'll just hold up for you to see if you want to read it yourself. That was in the Washington Examiner. This other article was in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. But when we come back, I want to take on a couple of other issues because I think there's some lessons we can learn from this. Yes, she is indeed going to sing now on Thanksgiving Day and the Dallas Cowboy game, but I think there are still some things that need to take place. Saying, oh, okay, maybe you're not so bad after all, I'm going to sing, I don't think fixes the problem. And so I wanted to identify and address at least 3 issues that have surfaced from the debacle created by Ellie Goulding. We'll talk more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Strong families are the foundation of a strong nation, and this is the obvious conclusion stated by everyone from Michael Novak to Senator Ben Sasse. In a short commentary on America, Senator Marco Rubio joins the discussion. He laments that for many Americans, marriage now resembles a luxury good, which he says keeps stable families from forming in the first place. An economic gap has emerged in which working-class Americans are marrying less and less frequently. Charles Murray documents in his book Coming Apart the percentage of children living with both biological parents is changing. 85% of affluent families and just 30% of working-class families. Unfortunately, an unstable home often leads to worse outcomes later in life. Childhood itself has changed over the decades. He reminds us of the decline of cornerstone institutions that once nurtured parents and children. This denied a generation of children the opportunity to experience relationships built through strong community bonds. That void has been filled with social media, which spawns online bullying, widespread mental health issues, and countless hours formerly spent socializing, now spent alone. Senator Rubio realizes that only a small part of the solution is political. His work to expand the federal per-child tax credit and proposed other policy changes, but he understands that that may only be treating the symptoms, not the cure. He understands that no law can force someone to be a better parent or spouse. The ultimate solutions to family decline will take place in the social, cultural, and religious realm. That is why all of us must work to promote a pro-life, pro-family agenda and explain to those in our sphere of influence the importance of family. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just talk about Ellie Goulding for a few more minutes. 50 Shades of Grey is one of the songs that actually she has participated in that film, and Burn and Light and a number of others, and she's done fairly well, and at the age of 32 is certainly on her way to other success, even if a lot of people did not know who she was. But I'm thinking of another 32-year-old right now, Colin Kaepernick, who is actually working out right now to play maybe again in the NFL. And these are two individuals who maybe didn't intend to harm the NFL, but in some respects tended to harm their brand. And we will see how many people applaud her when she sings, how many people boo her. But it all started in large part when she actually posted an Instagram picture. And it showed her actually in this particular picture helping people at the Salvation Army. And so I thought it was a really positive posting. And I loved what she even said there, because the point she made is, okay, so maybe the hairnet is not my strongest look, but thank you, Salvation Army, for helping us in New York, and all the things that she was talking about there. So she was using this to promote the Salvation Army. And she was using this ultimately also to promote herself, so that a lot of people that would be tuning in that maybe didn't know her would hear her singing with the Salvation Army. And so, again, she had some good things to say about the organization. Matter of fact, even said Americans overcome poverty, addiction, and economic hardships through a range of social services. And then she sat down and spoke to several people who had come in from the bitter cold for some food, because they served 150 people in New York City that day, and had a chat with them. So all was good until one follower said that this is an organization that lets
again, as this person put it, queer homeless people die. And instead of saying, wait a minute, these seem like nice people, maybe I need to investigate this, instead she was, as Tony Perkins says, willing to throw millions of needy people under the bus to prove her LGBTQ loyalty. And so she said, upon researching this, I've reached out to the Salvation Army and said that I have no choice but to pull out unless they quickly make a solid, committed pledge or donation to the LGBT community. And so the first lesson, if you want to write them 1 to 3, is don't always trust the internet. Don't always trust social media. It, as far as we can tell, is just one individual, because you can go back and look at her Instagram post. It's just one individual that brought this up. Maybe she saw some other complaints from a few other disgruntled LGBTQ members of that community. And so immediately she jumps to that conclusion. Now, let me be an equal opportunity grief giver for just a minute. It isn't just that she jumped to conclusions, but we probably have a really sad history of over the years of Christians that have said, well, the trademark for Procter & Gamble is a satanic symbol. You remember that one? As a matter of fact, I did a whole week of radio programs for the Pro Radio program one time called Christian Myths, and I made it available not only on our program, but also to various station managers, because they would get all sorts of people writing in about Madeline Murray O'Hare is trying to take Christian radio off the air. This coming from when Madeline Murray O'Hare was no longer even living, that Procter & Gamble has a satanic trademark, and you can go through the long, sad list. And so if there's, first of all, one lesson I think we can learn vicariously from Ellie Goulding is that, you know what? Just because one person says it, just because you read it on the internet, just because you had a social media response, doesn't necessarily make it true. And I love how Tony Perkins put it. He said, I'm not quite sure what research, quote, he puts in quotes, Ellie actually did, since even members of the gay community have insisted that the charity helps all people, and then points to this article that was in the Washington Examiner, which I just held up a minute ago, that talks about one of these LGBTQ groups that actually tried to test the theory, encouraging people in the gay community there to rate Salvation Army's tolerance at local shelters. And the response was so positive that the organization, that is the LGBTQ organization, endorsed Salvation Army. One of their lines was, given this information and the sincere, earnest beliefs of the staff and leadership at the local Salvation Army, we feel comfortable recommending that members of our community support our local Salvation Army. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to come to the attention of Ellie Goulding. And so that is, of course, one issue. Of course, I already read to you the comments from David Hudson, National Commander of the Salvation Army, who used this as a teaching opportunity. And so if nothing else, this might be helpful in the future just to maybe cause some people to have some attention about this. But that brings me to my second point. Number one, don't trust the internet. Point number two, bad news and gossip tend to travel faster than the truth. You probably heard the old phrase, a lie is halfway around the world before truth can get its boots on. That phrase actually existed long before there was an internet, long before there was social media. So if it was true almost a century ago, it's certainly true now. And you do have to wonder about what will be some of the negative impact that this could have on the Salvation Army. Because you know you're going to hear some people will find out about the fact that this pop singer decided she was not going to actually sing because the Salvation Army is a hate group, right? That's at least the argument being used. I love what Tony Perkins says. You know, I've never heard of a hate group feeding, housing, and treating 23 million people a year. What I have heard are plenty of liberals willing to let families starve in the name of fairness that they don't practice. And so this could be a real negative on the Salvation Army, because a lot of people will hear the story about the fact that she wasn't going to sing. You can, if you look a little bit, find 2 or 3 places that do now announce that she is going to sing. But that brings me to my third point. And that is, first of all, don't trust the internet, because sometimes that could be wrong. Number 2, how often bad news and gossip travels much faster than the truth. But number 3, erroneous public statements need correction. Maybe she has issued some other statements. Maybe she will at the game, so we will wait to see how this plays out. But it isn't really enough to come out there and smear an organization like the Salvation Army and then come back and go, oh, my bad. Okay, I'll sing after all. I think you need some more significant positive emphasis than that. And so it's just a suggestion. Not that she listens to this program, but I suspect some of you that have been supporting the Salvation Army are certainly listening to this program. And maybe the only thing we can do right now is hope that maybe she does say something positive before that particular kickoff on Thanksgiving Day. She will have a national audience. There are a lot of people that tend to watch the games that are actually broadcast on Thanksgiving. It used to be just 2, the Detroit Lions and their opponent, Dallas Cowboys and their opponent. But now, of course, you'll have one other one that is in the evening. So maybe there will be a chance. But nevertheless, a lot of people tend to love the Dallas Cowboys. Last week when the Dallas Cowboys played the Minnesota Vikings, there was somebody, I think it was an NBC, saying, if we could, we'd play the Cowboys every week because they are just a ratings bonanza. Even when the Cowboys have not been doing well, a lot of people will tune in to watch the Dallas Cowboys, and there will be a lot of people tuning in to watch the Dallas Cowboys, and maybe now even to watch what happens during the halftime celebration. And so we will see. But nevertheless, I think there are some very important lessons to learn that we should apply to our lives. Number 1, just because you read it on the internet, don't jump to a conclusion. Do some extra research. Number 2, recognize that sometimes bad news, gossip, inaccurate information is traveled halfway around the world before truth, as I said, even can get its boots on. And then finally, if you are going to say something negative about a major organization and you are wrong, I think it's up to you to go back and try to clarify some of that and correct some of that, and we'll see what she does with that in that regard. Maybe it took too long on that, but it just was a great teaching lesson, not only for us to know a little bit more about this story, but also to think about how we, when we are in possession of information or sometimes even misinformation, how do we react? How should we step forward? And maybe we should be a little quicker to check things out and not so quick to react at a moment's notice on something we see on our Facebook feed or our Twitter post or something of that nature. Anyway, when we come back, we do need to talk about the impeachment process that has been unfolding before our very eyes. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about some of these issues, one of the articles we posted today, Impeachment Witnesses, we'll talk about that. We also have information about Steve Green's book and also information about Lifeline Global, and those will be interviews we'll be doing about a half an hour and an hour and a half from now. So let's take a break. We'll get into some of that information right after these important messages.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Let's come back to this issue of impeachment. A little bit later, we'll maybe get back into it again, but let's help you understand that so far we've heard from 2 witnesses yesterday, 1 tomorrow, and then you will have a few more next week. 5 days of testimony. And these are sort of scattered a little bit because, after all, there's no testimony on Monday because we don't, well, of course, want members of Congress to work on Monday. And then, of course, they only go through Thursday of next week because then they go on their Thanksgiving recess. This whole idea that they want to have a vote by Christmas is based upon the assumption that they're just going to push this through. And, of course, you had 2 yesterday, 1 tomorrow, which will be the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, and then you'll wait till Tuesday. There'll be 3 that will testify that day, including a few that would probably be good to hear from. Kurt Volker, for example, and Alexander Vidman. Wednesday, you'll have 3 more, which again might be interesting because Gordon Sondland, I'll talk about him in just a minute, seems to be contradicting what we heard William Taylor say yesterday, and then 1 on Thursday, and that's it. If you go back and look at the list of the various individuals that Republicans wanted to have testify, you're going to see that very few of them ended up on the list. And so this thing has really been kind of streamlined. Some people have said it's been pushed ahead. Whatever illustration you want to use is, I think, appropriate because it is not anything like what was the investigation of impeachment of either Richard Nixon or Bill Clinton. And that, of course, is part of what I will talk about in just a minute. But the article that I've posted here for you to read is by Matt Vespa, because I thought not only does he give you sort of a good overview, but he posts a number of Twitter posts. And sometimes when these people that tend to talk for long periods of time have to try to summarize them in 150 characters or 280 characters, they kind of get to the point. One of those individuals posted, Representative Mike Turner, a moderate and a defense foreign policy guru, is telling both witnesses that their testimony is hearsay and wouldn't be allowed in a court of law. Guys, the Republicans are not going to vote for impeachment. So that was one of the Twitter posts that I thought was interesting. Elizabeth Harrington basically tried to summarize the testimony yesterday in this way. She said the entire premise of this impeachment sham, she said, is that President Trump was twisting the arm of President Zelensky over aid that they didn't know was held up. Then she goes on to say, Taylor, and this, of course, would be William Taylor, the first person to testify yesterday, held 3 meetings with President Zelensky. Not once were Biden or Burisma, which is, of course, that Ukrainian group, actually brought up. But I thought one of the most interesting exchanges was recaptured by Kevin McCarthy. He is the House Minority Leader. If indeed the Republicans win enough seats, he could be the next Speaker of the House if they win. If not, he will continue as probably the House Minority Leader. But he has this summary of an exchange between Representative Jim Jordan and William Taylor, acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. Jim Jordan, Representative Jordan, said, "You didn't listen in on President Trump and Zelensky's call." Taylor, "I did not." Jordan, "You've never talked with the Chief of Staff Mulvaney." Taylor, "I never did." "You've never met the president." Taylor, "That's correct." Jordan says, "And you're their star witness?" Which I thought was a great line because, indeed, these allegations are coming from an individual that was probably the star witness. If indeed you were going to, out of the box, really have kind of a knockout punch, certainly the statements by George Kent and William Taylor yesterday should have been that. I'll get to what has been seen as the blockbuster issue, which I've already addressed, but I thought one more that might be helpful would be one from Mark Meadows, who again is a representative and an individual that is a conservative, who nevertheless said Bill Taylor, the Democrat star witness, has basically admitted today that he got virtually all this hearsay info from Gordon Sondland. Now, Sondland, by the way, is going to testify next Wednesday, so we'll see what that's the case. And we have Sondland in writing admitting that he didn't know what happened with Ukraine aid. And so, again, the argument is this is a farce. So these are the kinds of things that have been posted by individuals in Congress, but I thought I'd give you one more. Cheryl Atkinson, of course, is an individual that has worked for the major media and yet at the same time has now exposed what she feels sometimes is a great deal of bias in the major media. But her Twitter post at the end of this article, which you can read it's posted on our website, I love how she puts it. Look, I'm no expert, and neither am I the smartest in the room, obviously, but my amateur analysis is this. And again, this is an individual work for the major media, and now even to this day is writing books about media bias and all sorts of things. She says, so far, the impeachment testimony has been a major bust for Democrats and has helped Donald Trump. I also assume few minds have been changed, comments, difference of opinion. And so that was one of her Twitter posts, just illustrating again what's taking place. Well, our good friend Gary Bauer, I was hoping he would be with us on Friday. He's just very busy right now. So let me give you his 10 points before we take a break, because this, he thinks, is probably a good way to summarize what took place yesterday. He says, number one, this process is all wrong. And the point he makes is the House Judiciary Committee is the appropriate venue for these investigations, not the Intelligence Committee. But because at least Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi felt that the Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler fumbled his attempt, they focused on the Intelligence Committee rather than on the Judiciary Committee, and that's a big issue. Number two, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, has repeatedly discredited himself, and he gives lots of examples of times in which statements have been made by Representative Schiff that actually have been proven to be false. And we don't need to go into all those. You can accept those or certainly read them for yourself. Number three, the so-called whistleblower who triggered this constitutional crisis is nowhere to be seen. Schiff refuses to produce him. In short, the president is being threatened with impeachment from an anonymous source. Number four, Schiff claimed that he does not know the identity of the whistleblower, even though his staff met with him. Now, I'll be fair, that's at least theoretically possible, but it does strain credulity a little bit. But the fifth point, he says, is that the star witnesses that were actually brought in there, George Kent and William Taylor, had never spoken to the president and did not participate in the call with the Ukrainian president. We've already said that. Number six, he says, I heard these gentlemen repeatedly express their opinions and their disagreements with the president, but they weren't elected to anything. They don't set policy. That's the president's job. And so a lot of the testimony yesterday was, well, we think Ukraine is an important ally. Well, maybe it is. And, of course, if you've listened to Tucker Carlson last night, he made a big point that most Americans could not find Ukraine on a map. And so there are a lot of Americans, including Donald Trump, that are just saying, I'm just not sure how much we want to back what's happened in Ukraine, other than because we want to support them against the Russians. But that's another point for another day. Number seven, Kent and Taylor, both those individuals that testified yesterday, claimed they were concerned about aid to Ukraine being held up as it was fighting Russian aggression, but then later acknowledged that President Obama refused aid. I think all he gave were blankets. Kind of hard to fight the Russians with blankets, but okay. So if anybody's provided aid, it's been the Trump administration. Number eight, progressives are alleging that Trump was extorting the Ukrainian president by demanding an investigation of his political opponents. But again, the whole issue is that the president was just asking them to look at known corruption in 2016, not in 2020. Number nine, Ukraine's President Zelensky has denied that he felt extorted or bribed or pressured or anything like that. As a matter of fact, Zelensky told Ambassador Taylor, who we heard from yesterday, William Taylor, that he was happy with the call the day after it took place. And then number 10, Jim Jordan, as we just mentioned a minute ago, kind of demolished, as he says, Ambassador Taylor's clear understanding of a quid pro quo by noting that the ambassador was in multiple meetings during which the alleged demand for political investigations never came up. By the way, Jim Jordan is not supposed to be on that committee, but it was a kind of a stroke of genius, I think, by having some of those people in positions of leadership, primarily Kevin McCarthy and others, to say, let's move him to that committee. And I think he did a very good job of questioning some of those individuals. And, of course, the opening statements by Devin Nunes certainly addressed some of that as well. So that's just the way in which at least Gary Bauer summarized some of this. Since he won't be with us on Friday, I may repeat some of that on Friday when we have our roundtable discussion with Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. But when we come back from the break, real quickly, I want to get into just a few other aspects of that. The Wall Street Journal referred to the banality of impeachment. It's becoming more and more banal all the time and becoming less of something that could be used in the future and has now been completely redefined, as some of the words are being redefined as well. So we'll talk about that, as well as a good piece from Fred Lucas, 6 key moments from the first day of public impeachment hearings. We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention, just in a few minutes, we'll be talking with Steve Green about his latest book, This Beautiful Book. One of the earlier ones was This Dangerous Book, and it's all about the Bible, and I think you'll appreciate some of that conversation. And, of course, as the president of Hobby Lobby, he and his wife Jackie and others have been so involved in the Museum of the Bible. And if you ever do make your way to Washington, D.C., you really have to not only go to the Smithsonian and maybe the Capitol and the White House and everything else, but go to the Museum of the Bible. So we'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. Fred Lucas gives us 6 key moments from the first day of public impeachment hearings. I thought I would mention just a few of those real quickly in the time that we have. And his first point has to do with the Biden family. Because if you remember, we've talked about this before, and you've listened to other talk shows, they sometimes repeat this time and time again, in which Vice President Joe Biden, the father, obviously, of Hunter Biden, delivered a speech in 2018 in which he boasted about threatening, when he was vice president, to cancel $1 billion in U.S. aid to Ukraine if it didn't fire a prosecutor some thought to be investigating Burisma, which, of course, is the company that Hunter Biden, his son, was a part of. And ultimately, that prosecutor lost his job. So one of the attempts there was for the House Democrat counsel, who's Daniel Goldman. He wanted to try to deal with that quickly. So when we did have George Kent up front and center, Goldman said to Kent, to your knowledge, is there any factual basis to support those allegations? And Kent said, none whatsoever. Went on to simply argue that indeed this boast by the vice president, the former vice president at the time he gave it, was nothing more than hot air. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. If indeed it was nothing more than a boast, it certainly did not help him, his campaign, or his son. So I'll leave it at that. But a little bit later, I thought it was interesting that you had not only the House Democrat counsel, but you also have the House Republican counsel, and that's Steve Castor. And so he decided at one point, especially when we had George Kent there, to drill down a little bit further. So Castor then asked, was Hunter Biden a corporate governance expert? Well, again, George Kent said, I have no idea what Hunter Biden studied at a university or what his CV, that is his curriculum vitae, says. Castor, so you don't know whether he had any experience in Ukraine prior to joining Burisma's board? Kent said, I've heard nothing about prior experience. Castor, again, the Republican, said, do you know if he speaks Ukrainian? Kent, I do not. Castor, do you know if he possessed any other elements other than he is the son of the, at the time, sitting vice president? I do not. Castor then asked Taylor, the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, do you know whether Hunter Biden offers anything other than his dad is the former vice president? And then in this particular case, William Taylor said, I don't. I have no knowledge of Hunter Biden, which at least gets back to the point that he was on that particular board because he wanted to be making $50,000 a month and because his father was the vice president of the United States. So maybe they did a good job of setting aside the fact that this boast by the vice president may have been nothing more than a boast, an empty boast at that, but it certainly did not help him or his son. The other kind of blockbuster issue is what George Lucas talks about, that Trump cares more about the investigations. And I knew this was going to be coming up because there had already been some leakage about this from the previous testimony. And so the argument is that indeed, in the presence of my staff in a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called Donald Trump, President Trump, and told him of his meetings in Kiev. And then after that phone call, a member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. And so Ambassador Sondland, who again will be testifying next Thursday, so we'll see what he has to say, responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden than concerned about Ukraine. That has been kind of the blockbuster for the day. I sort of already addressed that yesterday, but let me give you the answer as well. If you were to have had somebody talking to Bill Clinton when there was the impeachment investigation and ask him how concerned he was about Osama bin Laden, for example, even though he had fired missiles into what was assumed to be the tent of Osama bin Laden, was he more concerned about this impeachment investigation rather than Osama bin Laden? I think you know what the answer would be. And so that, I think, is just a good point about the fact that this investigation was something that stimulated the Mueller investigation and the Mueller report. And I think if that's the worst that comes from the hearings, it may say that he maybe wasn't always focused on Ukraine. And, of course, a lot of Americans, like I said, might not even be able to tell you where Ukraine is located on the globe. But it certainly doesn't tell you anything other than the fact that because of these Mueller investigations and everything else, maybe that was more on his mind. And then, especially since some of this began from Ukraine, he was more investigating that and concerned about that than what was happening in Ukraine. A couple other issues very quickly. The visit and aid tied to the investigation. Of course, we've talked about that before because, again, the Trump administration held up for a short period of time about $400 million of congressionally approved aid to Ukraine over the concerns about corruption. And that seems to be the justification. And if indeed it was a quid pro quo, then both President Zelensky did not know about that, did not bring it up. It was not a conversation that they had on 3 separate occasions with William Taylor. And more importantly, the security assistance aid actually did flow, so you can't really come up with anything in that regard. And then, of course, some of the other points he makes are what I heard them tell me, because a lot of this has to do with hearsay evidence. If you listen to some of the talk shows today, they've been playing some of these pop music songs of, somebody told me. I'm not even going to sing it for you. You don't want to hear me sing, but nevertheless, this idea that everything is back to hearsay evidence or second or third-hand reporting. And most importantly, this whole question of Ukraine policy. Taylor testified at one point that the Trump administration's policy towards Ukraine has actually been an improvement over the policy that was held by the Obama administration. And so, again, if the argument yesterday was that this president has the eye off the ball and hasn't done enough to support our allies in Ukraine, you have the testimony from William Taylor yesterday that actually the policy from this administration is actually better than the previous administration. And so those are just a couple of things to really think about in terms of some of the issues that need to be put on the table. But if nothing else, just a great illustration of a lot to do about nothing. If you watch those hearings, I've had more than a few people say that it was almost unbearable to watch because it got very quickly into sort of arcane, esoteric conversations. It had a lot to do with our policy towards Ukraine, which again is something that is certainly relevant to consider, but is certainly not an impeachable offense. And so if this was, if you will, the 2 star witnesses, don't know that we're going to come to expect a whole lot more from Friday. But, that's why we have our Friday weekend edition. We'll see what is testified about tomorrow. And then next week, of course, there will be testimony both on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then, of course, Congress, they can't work too hard, so then they're going to go on their Thanksgiving recess. And sometimes we get closer to December, maybe they'll get back together. And at that point, we'll see whether or not there's even a vote. Because even to vote on the articles of impeachment, that has to go from the House Judiciary Committee. And none of that's happened there yet. So we'll see where this takes us. All that coming up right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. In just a few minutes, we'll get into some of the things that transpired yesterday in the impeachment proceedings. But before we do that, I wanted to focus some time and attention on the Bible, as we have so often here on Point of View. And just to give you an overview, we're going to be talking with our good friend Steve Green, president of Hobby Lobby. And he, along with his wife, have been on the program as we talked about this dangerous book. We're going to be talking about this new book, this beautiful book, an exploration of the Bible's incredible storyline and why it matters today. It's a Zondervan book, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But let me just mention that after that, we will get into some of the material related to the testimony yesterday on impeachment. Our first article is something I'll be quoting from in about a half an hour. And so that will be kind of how we'll cover the first hour. Then the next hour, Romney Ruder will be with us. We'll be talking about Lifeline Global, and this will be revisiting some of the conversations we've had in the past about some of the most incredible outreaches to those behind bars, to prisoners who are getting a Bible education, a seminary level education, learning a lot more about how to apply Christian principles. For those that are getting out, I believe it is going to lower dramatically, and it already has been reducing the recidivism rate. Some of these individuals are there for life and still having a ministry behind bars. So we'll be talking about that as well. So those are all conversations we're going to have. And let's, if we can, go to Steve Green. Of course, we've had Steve and Jackie Green on the program before. Of course, we've had David Green, the father and founder of Hobby Lobby, in studio. And more recently, of course, we've had this Millennial Roundtable. Lauren Green McAfee as well as Michael have been on the program. So we've had a number of family members. Again, this is a book which is just coming out now by Zondervan, this beautiful book, an exploration of the Bible's incredible storyline and why it matters today. And, of course, Steve Green and his wife Jackie are the co-founders of the Museum of the Bible. If you ever make it to Washington, D.C., of course, go to the Smithsonian and maybe the White House and some others, but don't miss going to the Museum of the Bible. Steve Green, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Glad to be back. Appreciate you having me.
And one of the things I thought we might talk about is these series of books that you're putting together, because the last one really reminded us about how the Bible has shaped our world, why it still matters. This one is really more kind of some of the stories about the Bible, but both of these, I think, fit very well with the vision that you and your wife have had in terms of establishing the Museum of the Bible.
Well, they do. They work well together. The Museum of the Bible, our story is kind of told in this dangerous book, and how it's impacted our life, and a bit of our journey on building the museum. And this beautiful book focuses on one aspect of that museum, and that is the narrative floor, or what is this book's story. And really have two goals. One is to tell a person that may not know what that story is, that what the Bible story is, and then the underlying goal is to show that this is a story, that all of these books that have been put together, all these stories, they come together to make a story, which makes the Bible really unique and unlike anything else. So the goal is to teach somebody to basically have an understanding what the Bible story is, and show that it's all connected.
One of the stories you tell early on is about Mephibosheth, I always have trouble with that name, but the bottom line is we were talking about an individual that if I were to go into maybe even a Sunday school class and ask people, do you know who this is? They'd all probably look at their shoes, and yet it's a great story because this, of course, is the son of Jonathan. It takes us back to David and Jonathan and Saul. But it's a great story, and one of the reasons that you put it in there is it's a story that a lot of people maybe don't know, of an individual that became lame and then found himself in hiding because, after all, now King David is running the country. And then when David calls him back together, it's a really powerful story. Tell us more if you might.
Yeah, and it's one of those stories that you have to even piece together because part of that story is told in chapter 4 of 2 Samuel, and then 5 chapters later in chapter 9 it comes back to Mephibosheth. And you have to kind of put them together, and if you don't, it's easily to miss this story. As you said, Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, the son of the king, and when his nursemaid found out that Saul and Jonathan had died in battle, she fled and tripped and fell. He became crippled and was kind of out in hiding because there's this fear that as a potential heir to the throne is the new king going to be threatened by him and want to kill him. And it's 5 chapters later in chapter 9 where David seeks out Mephibosheth and says, no, I want him to come and I want him to sit at my table, which really is telling the story of what God has done for us as we have as man have fallen and walked away from him through our disobedience. He seeks us out and invites us back into a relationship with him. While we deserve death, he offers us life. And so Mephibosheth is a way of showing how that story is what the story of the Bible is all about.
And again, I think it's also illustrative of the fact that sometimes it isn't a straight diagonal line to success. The story of Joseph is a good example. He finds himself in a pit, finds himself in a prison, again, is wondering what God might be doing through him, and eventually becomes second in command in Egypt. So some of these stories that we have in the Bible ring true because it isn't happily ever after. It isn't I had one challenge and immediately I became second in command of Egypt. It isn't that I was the grandson of Saul, the son of Jonathan, and thus found myself in a position where I was sitting at the table of David. Instead, there's just really an authenticity that runs through the Scripture, which I think is just one more argument for the fact that it was written by God, not by man, because we would try to make it much easier and simpler than what we find in the Scriptures.
Yeah, time and time again, life just shows Scripture is true. It says that we are fallen, and you look at the news lines every day and you see time and time again that we as mankind are by nature do things that are wrong, and we all experience that, and life presents us challenges, and what Scripture says is that even through the midst of those challenges, God is there with us, guiding us, and in many cases he uses what Satan means for evil for our good, and it's a great story to be told, and we just want people to understand what that story is.
Well, again, the book is entitled This Beautiful Book. We have information about it on our website. It is published by Zondervan, so you can be looking for it in your local bookstore. And, of course, if you wanted to order it ahead of time, that is available there as well. Just coming out right now. And so it is an exploration of the Bible's incredible storyline and why it matters. So we have that link on the website that you can follow. And also when we come back, we're going to talk about the musical Les Miserables. And you said you had a hard time keeping the character straight, but once you understood that, it helped clarify that. And in this particular chapter, you talk about how important it is letting God be God. So we're going to get back into one or two other stories from this book. But if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, it is now out. It should be arriving in your local bookstore, This Beautiful Book. And we'll continue our conversation with Steve Green right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Strong families are the foundation of a strong nation, and this is the obvious conclusion stated by everyone from Michael Novak to Senator Ben Sasse. In a short commentary on America, Senator Marco Rubio joins the discussion. He laments that for many Americans, marriage now resembles a luxury good, which he says keeps stable families from forming in the first place. An economic gap has emerged in which working-class Americans are marrying less and less frequently. Charles Murray documents in his book Coming Apart the percentage of children living with both biological parents is changing. 85% of affluent families and just 30% of working-class families. Unfortunately, an unstable home often leads to worse outcomes later in life. Childhood itself has changed over the decades. He reminds us of the decline of cornerstone institutions that once nurtured parents and children. This denied a generation of children the opportunity to experience relationships built through strong community bonds. That void has been filled with social media, which spawns online bullying, widespread mental health issues, and countless hours formerly spent socializing, now spent alone. Senator Rubio realizes that only a small part of the solution is political. His work to expand the federal per-child tax credit and proposed other policy changes, but he understands that that may only be treating the symptoms, not the cure. He understands that no law can force someone to be a better parent or spouse. The ultimate solutions to family decline will take place in the social, cultural, and religious realm. That is why all of us must work to promote a pro-life, pro-family agenda and explain to those in our sphere of influence the importance of family. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Steve Green with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about the new book that is just out, This Beautiful Book. And again, I would commend you both of these because one that really helps you understand some of the influence of the Bible in history, and this one, the story of stories, and sometimes stories within stories are significant. And in Chapter 4, you talk about when you watch the musical Les Miserables, had trouble kind of telling which characters were the good guys and the bad guys, but the more you know about the characters, the better we understand their motivation. And that kind of fits into just understanding how God has been working through history using fallible individuals. But again, it's all part of this theme that you have in your book, Steve, of these stories within stories that tell the overall story of creation, fall, and redemption.
Yeah, I was. My wife and I were in New York, and we were going to go to see Les Miserables because we had some friends that said it was one of their most favorite stories. And I didn't know the story, had not read it, but thought, well, we'll go watch the Broadway play. And it's a musical, and I remember at intermission being confused. There was this character, Jean Valjean, Javert, who is who, what's what, and there was a little bit of the storyline in the playbill, so we were kind of trying to read it to try to get caught up, and the lights went out, and off we go again. At the end, it was I didn't really enjoy it because I wasn't able to follow the storyline. I gave it another try, went home, watched one of the movies, and wanted to come back and watched it again, and it became one of my favorite Broadway plays because it is such a great story. And the point I would try to make is that if we go to the Bible without understanding its overall story, there may be parts that become very confusing and challenging and just may not make sense. And I think it's a value for us to, first of all, understand what is the book's story as a whole, so that as we go and we read it, we understand more what God is doing in the lives of the characters that are being portrayed, and in some cases in the good times and in the bad times, as you mentioned. So, but it's important for us to understand the story to begin with. That helps us as we go to read it in the individual stories.
And again, that you take us through in this book from creation to the book of Revelation. And so it's Abraham and Moses and David, and you help us understand what is happening during the kings and what Proverbs is all about for, and why Psalms is there, and what the wisdom literature is. And then, of course, in the New Testament, Jesus, the unlikely king, the genealogy of Jesus, some of the prophecy, and even the spread of the good news through the book of Acts and through the various epistles. And this, I think, is helpful, especially maybe put in the hands of an individual that has become a new Christian, or maybe has never really looked at the Bible in its totality, maybe dipped in and read this verse here, that verse there. Sometimes when you, as you said, understand the entire story of Les Miserables, or in this case, the entire story from creation to redemption, you understand why some of these particular books are in the Bible, what you should be able to discern from them, and maybe even more effectively know how to interpret them, because obviously we're going to look at verses in the Psalms in a different way than we're going to look in the Proverbs, and very differently in terms of some of the epistles of the Apostle Paul. So each one of those particular areas requires that we understand how the pieces fit with the overall, and thus we'll be able to interpret the Scriptures and apply them more effectively.
Exactly. And so while I try to go through each of the sections, categories of the Bible to highlight, what the goal and the purpose is in some of those, I focus on primarily five main characters in the Bible. It's Abraham, Moses, King David, Isaiah, and Jesus. Those five characters kind of become the spine of the book. The first three, Abraham, Moses, and King David, were all given a promise. And Isaiah, I focus on the prophecy of Isaiah 53,
right,
and show that the three promises and that prophecy, it all points to Jesus, that he is the central figure of the whole book. And then, the question is, am I making this up? Is this just my interpretation? And when you look in the New Testament, we look at three messages and a meeting. The three messages are Peter, Paul, and Stephen, and then the meeting that Philip had with the Ethiopian eunuch. And those messages in the meeting are saying that the promises given to Abraham, Moses, and David, and the prophecy of Isaiah, it all points to Jesus. So I'm not trying to bring my own interpretation. I am just saying, here is what this book is saying. It is saying that this is a story, and it all is essentially focused on Jesus and what he did when he died on the cross that we might have life. That is, in essence, what this book is all about.
I know you need to go in just a minute, but I thought just for a minute you might also talk about the Museum of the Bible. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about what, again, an incredible museum that is. And every time I run into someone, Steve, that's been to the Museum of the Bible, I say, what do you think? And they all go, this is incredible, more than I would have ever expected. So just real quickly, talk about what is available at the Museum of the Bible, and why so many times I and others have been encouraging people, if they ever make it to Washington, D.C., to make sure that they schedule a time at the Museum of the Bible.
Yeah, well, the core of our museum is we look at the Bible in three different ways. The narrative, which my book is about, this beautiful book is all about, is trying to tell the story, is one of the floors where the goal is to have a person have a basic understanding of the story of the Bible. The other two ways we look at it is its history and its impact. We want to show on the history floor the archaeological evidence, the manuscript evidence for this book. We look into the digital age, the printing digital age, and then we also are looking into the future, showing the effort to finalize the translation of the Bible into every language of the world in a space that we call the Illumination. So that's the history floor. And then the impact floor, this book speaks into every area of life, and it has impacted every area of life. And what we want to show is how that this book has been foundational to whether it be the educational system that we have, the sciences that we have, governments, art, literature, music, architecture, and in so many ways, the Bible has had an impact, and we just want to show that. There's a section there called Bible Now, and a screen will rotate, and it shows a world map, and it shows people that are engaging with this Bible right now via the YouVersion Bible app. And what it tells is that this book right now is being engaged with more than any other book. It's the best-selling book of all time and every year. And so those are the three ways we look at it. It's history, impact, and narrative. And hopefully people will be inspired as they leave here to say, I have got to know this book better. I want to be engaged with this book.
Again, Steve Green has been with us, president of Hobby Lobby, and of course also he and his wife co-founders of the Museum of the Bible. And again, the book is entitled This Beautiful Book. It has just come out and published by Zondervan. Look for it in your local bookstore. Steve, thank you so much for joining us once again here on Point of View.
You bet. Thank you, Kerby.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will get into a little bit of a discussion. We won't overdo it today, but certainly some things happened yesterday in terms of the impeachment inquiry. And let's just help you understand that yesterday we heard from two individuals, William Taylor, envoy to Ukraine, and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, George Kent. No one testifying today, but there will be testimony tomorrow. We'll probably spend a little bit of time talking about that on our Friday weekend edition. And then we'll have testimony Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. And then, of course, Congress once again will be on recess, so we'll see where that takes us. But if you want to kind of follow along, the first article on our website today is a piece by Matt Vespa, which is a kind of a good summary, because what he does is not only give you an overview of what happened yesterday, but posts a number of Twitter posts, which I think were a kind of a short way of summarizing some of the things that did take place. And then, since we were hoping to have Gary Bauer with us tomorrow, but he will not, I wanted to read from some of his summary of what took place yesterday in American Values. So that will give you a little bit of an idea of some of the things we'll talk about in the next half hour. And then we're going to get back to another aspect of ministry, Lifeline Global. Romney Ruder will be with us, and he'll be in studio, and we'll be talking about just the great opportunities to have a significant impact in those individuals who are prisoners, who are behind bars, some of whom will eventually come out and take the material that has been presented to them and use that in their lives. Some of those might be behind bars the rest of their lives, but will still be using that in their ministry. So we'll be talking about that issue as well. I think you'll appreciate that conversation. Don't forget that, of course, tomorrow is our Friday weekend edition. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews will be with us this time, and we'll certainly kind of get a summary of what has been happening with the hearing so far on this issue of impeachment. We'll get into some of the other issues of the campaign. We're starting to see now that certain individuals are beginning to surface. Others are not qualifying for the next Democratic presidential debate. And so that may be the culling away of some of these candidates and maybe giving us a little sharper focus on what indeed will be part of this primary campaign in 2020. So we have a lot to cover, but we'll come back and give you a brief summary, at least, of some of the things that took place yesterday in the impeachment inquiry. All that coming up right after this.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Let's see if we can, for just a few minutes, talk about impeachment in general, and then we'll look at what took place yesterday. It is very clear, if you go back and read some of the founders and some of the notes of the Constitutional Convention, that the founders really wanted impeachment to be used rather sparingly, if at all, against the commander-in-chief, against the president. Perhaps because they had in their mind George Washington, and they hoped that there would always be a George Washington as president. They, of course, didn't know that he would be the first president, but I think most of them suspected that to be the case. And so they probably felt that these would be honorable individuals that would be elected, and they would not be treasonous. But they recognized that we did have a couple of Benedict Arnolds out there, so it's always a possibility, but they probably did not expect impeachment to be used on the president as much as maybe they did think that impeachment might have been used occasionally for a judge, because after all, once you put a judge in office for life, because they serve for life with good behavior, there wasn't much of a way to remove those individuals. So if you've ever heard me talk about impeachment, my argument has always been that I think the framers intended impeachment would be used more frequently, but I meant for the judges, but less frequently, and maybe not even at all, for the president. And if you think of the first 200 years after the Constitution was ratified, what did we have? Well, we had an impeachment hearing on Andrew Johnson, which many people think probably was inappropriate. There was an attempt to impeach Richard Nixon, but he resigned. And so you really had very little talk about impeaching a president. Then you had the impeachment proceedings for Bill Clinton. Of course, he was not removed from office. And then, of course, you have this one now. And so I think it helps you understand that in some respects, impeachment was really set as a very high bar. High crimes and misdemeanors, treason, things of that nature. And if you understand that, you can understand why the editors of the Wall Street Journal talked about the banality of impeachment, because they said this isn't a search for truth. It's a set-piece production to promote a foregone conclusion. Democrats are turning impeachment into another partisan banality, and the country won't be the better for it. And they point out a number of things, and I won't go into all the details because I want to go to our first article we've posted, but they point out that, for example, the House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff won't allow most witnesses requested by Republicans. If you listened yesterday, I gave you the list that was put forward, and you don't see many of those on the list of those who will testify even next week. Not one testifying this week was on the Republican list. And maybe two of those next week could be considered ones that Republicans have put forward. But again, some of those were ones proposed by Democrats too. So you can see that it almost seems like there is a railroading taking place. Then you come to the second page of this commentary in which they remind us that the Justice Department has already dismissed some of the words being used, because the other day I talked about how they moved from the Latin term quid pro quo to the idea of bribery. And the Justice Department has already dismissed the bribery claim because there was no thing of value exchanged. And they also have, in a sense, dismissed the idea of extortion. That was the other word that was used, because that is not even relevant to the idea of aid to a foreign government. So they conclude their editorial by saying that in a healthier political culture, Democrats would be using the Ukraine episode as an argument against Donald Trump's reelection. How can you trust his foreign policy judgment in a second term when he won't have a check of another reelection? So that would be an argument that could be made, but that's not the argument being made. Instead, they say, Democrats have pulled out the constitutional bazooka of impeachment. They are doing so in partisan fashion, contrary to their earlier pledges, and in a political rush to beat the 2020 political calendar. On the evidence and the process to date, they are turning impeachment into a routine political weapon, and future presidents of both parties will regret it. I hope not, but it is certainly a possibility. So what did we learn yesterday? Again, just to refresh your memory, we had two individuals testifying. William Taylor, envoy to Ukraine first, and then later the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, George Kent. You can, as you find this first article that we've posted here on the website, get kind of a good summary by either reading through this, or I think Matt Vespa has done a very good job of pulling out, I think, some of the relevant Twitter posts. I appreciate that, because some of the individuals, when asked to explain something, they go into this deep, dark, arcane, esoteric language, and after a while I go, I can't follow it, and I know you probably can't as well. And sometimes there is a real value in saying, say it in as few words as allowed in a Twitter post. And so one of those individuals posted during the testimony that Representative Mike Turner, a moderate and defense foreign policy guru, is telling both witnesses that their testimony is hearsay and wouldn't be allowed in a court of law. Goes on to say, guys, Republicans are not going to vote for impeachment, and that would be certainly the case. Elizabeth Harrington had a Twitter post which I thought was a good summary of some of the other aspects of this as well, in which she said the entire premise of this impeachment sham is that President Trump was twisting the arm of President Zelensky over aid they didn't know was held up in the first place. Goes on to say, Taylor held 3 meetings. This would be William Taylor, the first person to testify. 3 meetings with President Zelensky. Not once was the name Biden or Burisma brought up. And Biden, of course, would be Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden. Burisma, of course, is the Ukraine energy company. But one that kind of made me laugh out loud when I first read it, I had not heard it at the time, was posted by Kevin McCarthy. He is the House Minority Leader, but he was talking about some of the interchange between Representative Jim Jordan, who is a Republican from Ohio, who has not been in the past on the committee, but was placed on the committee by Kevin McCarthy, and I think wisely so, because he did some of the kind of, if you will, cross-examination. And so here you have Jim Jordan, in a sense, asking some questions of William Taylor, who has been the acting ambassador to Ukraine. Jim Jordan said, you didn't listen in on President Trump and President Zelensky's call. Bill Taylor says, I did not. Jordan says, you've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney. Taylor, I never did. You've never met the president, Jim Jordan says. William Taylor says, that's correct. And then the line from Jim Jordan, and you're the star witness, because it just illustrates again that a lot of this was hearsay evidence, and as I mentioned a minute ago, probably wouldn't even stand up in a court of law. Here's another one from Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows, a conservative. He's been on the program with us before. He's a representative as well. He said, Bill Taylor, the star witness for the Democrats, has basically admitted today that he got virtually all of his hearsay info from Gordon Sondland. By the way, Gordon Sondland is going to testify, and that is next Wednesday, November 20th, so we'll see what he says then. He says we have Sondland in writing admitting that he really didn't know what happened with Ukraine aid, and so again, you get that comment being made as well. And you can read through this article because we've posted it on the website to give you a little bit of a sense of what some of the individuals have said. I just picked out a couple of the Twitter posts because they illustrate the point only so well. But let me end with one at the very end of the article, and this one's by Cheryl Atkinson. Used to be a reporter for one of the major media. More recently has now been writing books sometimes about media bias and the rest. But I love her Twitter post because of its honesty and also getting to the point. She says, I'm no expert, and neither am I the smartest in the room, obviously, but my amateur analysis is this. So far, the impeachment testimony has been a major bust for Democrats and has helped Donald Trump. Also assume few minds have been changed, and that probably is the case. Oftentimes, these kinds of hearings are almost like an ink blot test, or what I call a Rorschach test, where everybody sees what they want to see. You know, you've held up an ink blot before, or maybe even you've been looking at clouds in the sky, and somebody says, oh, I see a horse, or I see a dog, or I see a cat. Everybody sees what they want to see, and this is certainly the case in terms of some of the action that has been taking place. So let's take a break, and when we come back very quickly, I'll run through some of the summary by Gary Bauer, because I think he has done a very good job of really citing 10 key points of what happened yesterday, and he refers to it as the deep state on display, but helps us at least kind of remind ourselves of a few things that we did learn yesterday. And, of course, we may learn some more, because tomorrow will be some testimony by the former UN ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. And then next Tuesday, we'll have a chance to hear from Jennifer Williams, an aide to the vice president, Alexander Vindman, which I think is going to be important because he's part of the National Security Council, and Kurt Volker, a special envoy to Ukraine. And then the next day, we'll hear from Gordon Sondland and a few other individuals, and then that may be it. But let's come back and talk a little bit more about a few things we learned from the testimony yesterday. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me talk about impeachment for a little bit longer, and then we're going to move on to some other topics. I think you're going to really enjoy our conversation about Lifeline Global. And for those of you that actually have had any kind of ministry in the prisons, first of all, I want you to be listening in. Second of all, I'd love to hear from you as well, what you have been doing to make a difference. Because after all, most of those people in prison are eventually going to come back and be in society, and anything we can do to return them to a life of productivity and to turn them away from a life of crime, I am all for it. So we'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. But our good friend Gary Bauer, we were hoping he could be with us tomorrow, but he is kind of busy, as you might imagine, did come up with a number of points. I numbered them 1 to 10, so we'll go through them real quickly, and there's probably other material that you can find. It came out yesterday in his end-of-day report, so if you'd like to read it in its entirety, because each one of these points, many of them have an HTML link, so that takes you to some other articles. So if you want to do some research on that, go to it. Number 1, he says the process is all wrong. You think? Because the House Judiciary Committee is the appropriate venue for such investigations. That was the case in the Nixon impeachment investigation. It was the case in the Clinton investigation. But why is it now the Intelligence Committee? His argument, and I think it's actually well proven, that Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi felt that the Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler fumbled this, so they handled the impeachment football instead to Adam Schiff. So first of all, the process is wrong. Number 2, the chairman of this Intelligence Committee, and that's Representative Adam Schiff, has repeatedly discredited himself. And if you say, well, wait a minute, I want some evidence for it, he's got lots of links there as well. I think that's, again, a pretty standard fact. If somebody disagrees with that, then certainly I want you to follow some of the links here, because there are some great stories of things which he is obviously not told the truth about. So that's another point. Number 3, the so-called whistleblower who triggered this constitutional crisis is nowhere to be seen. Schiff refuses to produce him, and that leads to number 4, that Adam Schiff actually claimed that he does not know the identity of the whistleblower, even though his staff has met with him. Now, that could be true, but it does sort of strain credulity. And if indeed this allegation is come forward, we require in a court of law, certainly individuals to actually present their evidence and then to be cross-examined, to face their accuser. And an example that came out just the other day, and now I've heard a couple of people mention it as well. Kevin McCarthy mentioned it yesterday, and I've heard others mention the fact that sometimes we even have young children that are actually asked if they have been abused to, even if they're 4 years old, go to a court and make their allegations. So if we ask that of a child, certainly think we should ask that of a whistleblower. But let me go on to a couple other points. Number 5, these star witnesses, and those, of course, would be George Kent, the Assistant Secretary of State, and Ambassador William Taylor, had said they had never spoken to the president and did not participate in the call with the Ukrainian president. We sort of covered that just a minute ago, but it's another very important point to remember. Number 6, Gary Bauer says, I heard these gentlemen repeatedly express their opinions and their disagreements with the president, but they weren't elected to anything. They don't get to set policy. That's the president's job, not theirs. And that is a good point, is that a lot of the statements made yesterday by William Taylor and George Kent were statements about, we disagree with what the Trump administration has done in Ukraine or the lack of attention in Ukraine. Although, interestingly enough, a little bit later, William Taylor did admit that in some respects he thought the Obama administration was worse and that the Trump administration was better in terms of Ukraine. But it does remind me of a piece that came out just yesterday by an individual, Tucker Carlson, who actually, I love one of his lines. He said, you know, if you ask Americans to find Ukraine on a map, probably couldn't find it. And again, the argument is that we need to provide military aid to Ukraine to fight Russia. Not necessarily disagreeing with that, but the point is that if indeed there's a difference in policy, okay, there's a difference in policy. That's not an impeachable offense. But that brings me to my last 4 points. Number 7, both George Kent and William Taylor claimed that they were concerned about aid to Ukraine being held up as it was fighting Russian aggression. And as I just alluded to a minute ago, the comments that have come out since then have pointed out that in some respects, the Obama administration did much less. It did provide blankets, but that's not exactly how you provide military aid to fight Russia. And so if you're arguing that indeed we need to provide aid, then back to one of the comments that Taylor said, Americans were willing to provide more than blankets. Yeah, that is so true. Number 8, progressives are alleging that Trump was extorting the Ukrainian president by demanding an investigation of his political opponents and thus inviting foreign interference in our elections, which is kind of the Russian collusion rehash, if he says. But nevertheless, if there's anything, one of the reasons there was this conversation in the first place was not about 2020, but what happened in 2016, the known corruption and political meddling that was done in Ukraine. And you have to go about a page and a half in the transcript before you even see anything that could, in any stretch of the imagination, be tied to Biden and the 2020 election. But we'll leave that for another day, and you can read the transcript for yourself, which brings us to the 2 final points. And that is the Ukraine president, Zelensky, has denied feeling extorted or pressured by the call from Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, President Zelensky actually told Ambassador Taylor just the day after the phone call that he felt happy with the call, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then the 10th and final one, Representative Jim Jordan kind of demolished Ambassador Taylor's clear understanding of a quid pro quo by noting that the ambassador was in multiple meetings during which the alleged demand for political investigations never came up. So just really quick 10 points that Gary Bauer mentioned in his end-of-day report. And we'll continue to follow this, but I don't know that there is anything that's going to develop over the next couple of days, because we have, of course, the testimony tomorrow from the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, and then next week we'll have a couple of others that will testify, and then we'll see where we go from there. But if I understand the rules of the House effectively, this is all in the Intelligence Committee, but the actual, if you will, draft for the issue of impeachment, the articles of impeachment, I believe, have to be drafted in the Judiciary Committee. And that, of course, then postpones any action there, because until you have articles of impeachment, you couldn't even get a vote in the House. So we'll see where this all takes us in the future. Let me just mention my Viewpoints commentary today is about family, and I just quote from a very good message given by Marco Rubio. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, since I wrote that last week, Marco Rubio has now given a speech on trade and the economy, and I've seen our good friend John Zmirak and some others criticizing that, so maybe there's going to be a follow-up to the Marco Rubio piece, but let's give credit where credit is due. At least Marco Rubio, and in the past, everybody from Senator Ben Sasse to Michael Novak have talked about the importance of family. And so this is an article just to remind us of the fact that families are important, children are important, and we can only do so much through the political process. He points out, of course, the fact that he's been able to expand the federal per-child tax credit, but the reality is most of those solutions are going to come from us in the social, cultural, and spiritual realm. So I just wanted to use his speech to remind us again of how important families are. Because if the family is strong, the nation is strong. If the family falls apart, the nation is in trouble. So a very important issue. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about ministry behind bars in prisons. All that coming up right after these important messages.
So when people first hear about Medi-Share, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become Medi-Share members? 2 big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With Medi-Share, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kerby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. If you've been listening to this program any length of time, you know that we certainly have a heart for reaching out to those in the prisons. As a matter of fact, on my booklet here, A Biblical View on Criminal Justice is one of the many resources we've had. Of course, we've had Byron Johnson on talking about more God, less crime. And most importantly, we've talked about what is now called Lifeline Global. We used to refer to it as Awana, but we'll get into all that detail in just a minute. But this is going to be a great opportunity for you to learn what is already taking place, how maybe you can take some of this and apply it to the prisons and penitentiaries in your community. And so we are privileged to have in studio with us today Romney Ruder, who is the president and CEO of Lifeline Global Ministries, individual that has his doctorate from Pepperdine University, lives in Wichita, Kansas, and before that actually served as the senior VP and COO of World Impact. And it is just great to have you in studio with us today.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
You know, we've had the Warden Burl Cain sitting in that
Sure.
chair. We've had all sorts of people, including some of your friends that are watching right now, sit around this table talking about this. But first of all, let's get to know you for a minute, because, of course, you come out of another area of ministry, and I've always appreciated what World Impact does. But now they've hired you, and you are actually front and center on a very dynamic ministry to reach out to those prisoners and their families.
Yeah, it certainly is. And prison ministry in itself can be just so broad, you know, everything from reentry to church planting. And Lifeline really tries to identify itself by engaging with your previous topic of engaging the family. We see the family as so important. And so our work is a curriculum built on it's a curriculum based on reconciliation for men and women to find peace within the lives that God called them to, and more importantly, recognize their God calling to be a parent to their children that are on the outside. And so with that transformation, they pass along those teaching lessons. They pass along, the power of the Holy Spirit to get transformation in the entire family dynamic, really breaking that chain of generational incarceration that has plagued our society.
And it's really one of the sad realities that sometimes an individual that is in prison breeds a generation after him or her that ends up in prison. And so when we have these broken branches on our family tree, we need to mend those. And so I know that we'll be talking about Malachi Dads and Hannah's Gift and a number of other things. But this whole development, talk about this, because we used to talk about Awana. And when people think of Awana, they think of church and they think of young kids. But out of this incredible vision has now become Lifeline Global Ministries.
Yeah, well, we are certainly proud of our roots with Awana. 15 years ago, Burl Cain had the issue down in Angola that while he was seeing men transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit, they didn't have a tool for them to pass along that information onto their kids and start building those branches of a reconciliation. And so they had approached Awana and said, hey, could you formulate something for us? And from that, Lifeline was developed. And fast forward to this last year, Awana has continued to consolidate and focus on their mainstream ministry, which is dealing with kids. They asked us to go independent and So happy to say, as a 15-year-old ministry, we're now almost a year into being Lifeline Global. So we went from Awana Lifeline to Lifeline Global.
Well, and again, we have a link to lifelineglobal.org, and there are a couple of events coming up here that you can find out about. There is a number of the stories which we're going to talk about. There are various programs that you can find out about, the curriculum, and also a way in which you can donate. And as we go through this, I'd love to hear from some of you that are involved in prison ministry of some sort, because this is one aspect of that in terms of really healing the family and the family structure and some of the dysfunction that leads to incarceration. And certainly some of you have been involved with, it could be Bill Glass, it could be Prison Fellowship, it could be Angel Tree, it could be all sorts of things. And so I'd love to hear what you're going on and doing in your community. So if you'd like to join us at any point, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And Romney, let's get into it a little bit, because this is the curriculum, and I've got the first one in front of me here, Malachi Dads,
right,
where fathers develop community and learn to live up to their biblical responsibility as a father. Now, we all know that that is sometimes one of the biggest issues. If you can identify a family where the father is in prison and he's an absent father, sometimes the next generation tends to follow him into some kind of difficulty. It may not be prison, but it may be something that isn't positive. So how do you break the chain?
Yeah, what I would say is that our common response to that question is that, we would throw out new community development programs, or we'd throw out new economic policies, or change our public policy. But really what we're looking is that, and if we take a look at a different paradigm, what we're looking at is a sin issue. And unfortunately, in many of our communities around the country, this tends to be a sin issue that plagues society, and so we see what is incarceration as a generational sin problem.
Yes, it is.
That can only be broken by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so by engaging, in this case with Malachi Dads, men, but women as well with our Hannah's Gift program, by engaging men and women in a program and a curriculum that allows them to identify the peace that can only be found through the Father, to seek reconciliation with their family and community, and then start those building blocks of relationship, it gives God maneuverability. It allows the Holy Spirit to fully reach out, and you see restoration.
Yeah, and again, these are individuals that oftentimes are themselves harmed or broken in one way or another. I know some people don't like to use the word broken, but whatever phrase you want to use, that are dealing with certain kinds of deficits, difficulties, or whatever from their own family of origin. And if you keep passing them on from one generation to the next, you're going to obviously have some problems. So that's one of the reasons why you've developed this curriculum. But I need to take a break. So when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And most importantly, I'm hoping today, and Romney, you probably would like this, I want to see if we can raise up a few more people to do this in various parts around the country. We broadcast in 42 different states. And, of course, we talked about what's happening and has been happening in Louisiana. But wouldn't it be fun if this could be happening in all sorts of places around the country, and implementing this and really changing the whole direction of where our nation goes? So, again, some of the things that we've written about in the past in terms of criminal justice and the need to, again, really identify some Christian answers and biblical answers to this issue has certainly been important. And so we're going to spend some time dealing with that. And if you'd like to join the conversation, maybe you have comments or questions, or maybe even like to say, okay, how do I get involved? Maybe this would be something we could bring to the prisons down the road or penitentiaries down the road that I'm aware of. Maybe you have some contacts or are bold enough to begin to start building some contacts. We want to let you know how you can be involved. And again, if you click on the picture there of Romney, you will see that will take you immediately to the website, which is entitled lifelineglobal.org. A little bit later, we'll talk about all the resources already on that website, but we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Strong families are the foundation of a strong nation, and this is the obvious conclusion stated by everyone from Michael Novak to Senator Ben Sasse. In a short commentary on America, Senator Marco Rubio joins the discussion. He laments that for many Americans, marriage now resembles a luxury good, which he says keeps stable families from forming in the first place. An economic gap has emerged in which working-class Americans are marrying less and less frequently. Charles Murray documents in his book Coming Apart the percentage of children living with both biological parents is changing. 85% of affluent families and just 30% of working-class families. Unfortunately, an unstable home often leads to worse outcomes later in life. Childhood itself has changed over the decades. He reminds us of the decline of cornerstone institutions that once nurtured parents and children. This denied a generation of children the opportunity to experience relationships built through strong community bonds. That void has been filled with social media, which spawns online bullying, widespread mental health issues, and countless hours formerly spent socializing, now spent alone. Senator Rubio realizes that only a small part of the solution is political. His work to expand the federal per-child tax credit and proposed other policy changes, but he understands that that may only be treating the symptoms, not the cure. He understands that no law can force someone to be a better parent or spouse. The ultimate solutions to family decline will take place in the social, cultural, and religious realm. That is why all of us must work to promote a pro-life, pro-family agenda and explain to those in our sphere of influence the importance of family. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking about Lifeline Global Ministries, let me just mention that if you say, well, I'd like to see what this looks like, to date, over 220 jails or prisons have used the Malachi Dads and Hannah's Gift programs. It's based on the vision. Malachi Dads is really based on the vision found in Malachi 4:6. So let's continue talking about that for just a minute, because over time people are going to say, okay, if I want to do this, where do I go to see that? But this idea of Malachi 4:6 and what is actually taught. So take us through the program for just a minute. If a man says, okay, I'm going to get into the program, I'm going to get the curriculum, which is on your website, what happens next?
Sure. So what I would say is that for the men and for the women, we have 4 distinctive programs that can be taken individually or can be built upon one another. In a general sense, it takes about 12 weeks to get through one of our books, and that is done in a group setting.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, we have different churches and other ministries that we partner with that might do an abbreviated portion of that. Maybe because of personnel or time or so on and so forth. They may just do book 1, or they may do Psalm 23 or Psalm 1, which were actually written by inmates for this program. And so typically, you can start with a minimum amount of students, but it's really a facilitation. If a teacher or if somebody wants to, a church member says, hey, I've got a heart for this, we don't necessarily need a theologian to teach. It's built, the questions and the study is built to be a part of it. So we need a facilitator. But it really relies on input from the men and women that are taking the class, and playing off one another's answers, and really starting to see not only collaboration, but you start to see that discipleship process start to fulfill itself.
So again, this is a curriculum that people can follow.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, you don't have to be a theologian. You can simply be a facilitator. And the other key to this is that you really want to work, in most cases, with a church. So if a listener right now is saying, okay, how do we get started? Maybe the first thing is to say to the pastor, this is something that we could really do to reach out to some of the prison inmates we have maybe just down the road from us, right?
Yeah. The reason that we certainly, Matthew 25, it gives the great call when Christ says, hey, you visit me in prison. And they say, hey, when did we visit you? And he said, well, when you visited the least of these, you visited me.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an interpretation there? I don't think so. So the church has a call to live out that message, and we provide an avenue for them to live out Christ's call there. And so for churches that desire to get involved, we rely on them really to not only build that discipleship relationship, but there's two key components of why we ask the church to be involved. Number one, Kerby, as you mentioned, some of these men and women are getting released.
Yes.
And it's just the reality of our current justice system. If you take a look at studies for men and women that are engaged in theological studies like this, that are engaged in a localized church, when they're released, the recidivism numbers go down to single digits.
Wow. Very good.
Whereas, you can see as high as 40, 50, 60% in some communities, the normal level of recidivism rates.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, we need to recognize that a result of our curriculum is that there's families being affected that are on the outside of those walls. Those families are only engaging mom or dad behind bars once a week, once every other week, maybe by letter.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, we don't want to take anything away from the power of the Holy Spirit. But the localized church gives those family members a place where they can find like-mindedness, they can find support, they can find a community. And that's really what we're trying to build. So the localized church is just really a hallmark of what we need to be successful.
So again, we want churches involved. I've been talking about Malachi dads just for a few minutes. Let's say we talk about, for the women, Hannah's gift, because this is something that is very important as well. Mothers are a primary caregiver in the home. You take the mom out of the home, you really have got some major issues, and that's why I think this is also an absolutely essential program. Tell us more.
If I could share a story with you, I was at a graduation for Hannah's Gift a few months back, and one of the graduates decided to give her testimony. She was in year 7 of a 25-year sentence, and we didn't find out what she was in for, but nonetheless, she said, hey, through this program, she says, I'm just letting you know, I wasn't a good mom. She had 2 girls, and her girls were now adults. And she said, because of addictions, because of lifestyle, because of the crowd that she ran around with, she said, I just wasn't there. And she says, but through what I've learned in Hannah's Gift of how to be an effective parent, she says, I've been rebuilding those relationships with my adult daughters. And she says, I'm able to now influence and be a part of my granddaughter's life. So again, we're seeing the generational storyline here. But what's even more impactful was that the daughter said to the mom, she says, Mom, she says, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. She says, but as I bring up my own daughter, I'm really doing everything opposite of what you did. Mm-hmm. She says, I'm trying to not do the destructive things that you brought into my life. She says, but I want you to know that I strive every day to be the woman that you are today.
Wow.
And I mean, that is just only of God would you hear those type of stories. So yeah, certainly it's a different dynamic, women in prison. Just the way that women are taught and relationship and so on and so forth, but highly important.
Yes. And I love the idea of Hannah's gift, because Hannah, if you remember, and that's in 1 Samuel 1-3, really was a long-distance mom. Now, she wasn't incarcerated, but Samuel, of course, goes to actually work in the temple. So there is this idea that you can still be a mom even if you're not in the home. And an individual that's serving 7 years out of a 25-year sentence, you can see that she's going to be a long-distance mom the rest of her life. And so that is just another great opportunity to see some of this having a positive impact. So again, for just before I take the break, talk about what people need to do if they say, I want to do this. This is something we need to do. Malachi Dad's, Hannah's gift, they might say, okay, where do we sign up and what is involved and what kind of evaluation needs to take place? Give us some overview of what's going to be taking place.
Yeah, what I would say is that certainly our Lifeline Global website is very insightful. We continue to add information on there to try to make it as easy as possible. We're getting actually ready to, on January 1, launch a cookbook, a how-to guide that really is very elementary, but is designed for that. If somebody just says, hey, God's put it on my heart, but I have no idea what I'm doing. We have a program partnership agreement on there that just basically lays out, hey, here's what you can expect from us in support, and here's what we can expect from you. And certainly there's contact information. We tend to be very hands-on because we want to ensure success. We share a lot of different best practices. We just had a webinar within the last 3 to 4 weeks, which we had 85 different people sign up for the webinar on Hannah's gift to really talk about some of the dynamics of how to launch that. So there's a variety of ways, but I would point people towards our website. As far as qualifications, if you have a heart and God's calling you that direction, we'd say, hey,
sounds good.
We want you.
Let me just mention real quickly, we're coming to a break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the idea of returning hearts, because we've talked about Malachi Dad's and Hannah's gift, but also want to talk about returning hearts. But here's my assignment to you, and that is there's a couple of really good videos there that you can watch. Most of them are about a minute long. And so I would encourage you to watch some videos, maybe take the time to pass them on to someone else. Maybe you say, well, this is something that our missions pastor needs to know about. Maybe our pastor needs to know about, or somebody else who maybe has somebody that's incarcerated that says, oh, I would really love to have something like this for my son, my daughter who's in prison right now, whatever that might be. We've got some videos that you can watch, and you can simply go to lifelineglobal.org. Or you can simply go to our website, pointofview.net. We have a link there. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of these stories. We'll talk about returning hearts and all of the aspects of that, what the curriculum is involved and how you can get involved. But most importantly, let's open up the phones for this last half hour. Perhaps you are already working in some area of prison ministry and would like to share that, or maybe you would like to get involved and like to ask a question. I think Romney would be glad to answer some of those questions, so we'll give him that opportunity to do so. So let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. What are you doing in the prisons? What would you like to do? We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
9.5 hour. Would love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Romney Ruder with us, and again with Lifeline Global. And we've got quite a bank of phone calls here I don't want to get to in just a minute. But Romney, it occurs to me one question probably comes to mind. Okay, you have the curriculum, but what's the cost, and how can people begin to use that in their own ministry?
one of the joys of being independent now is that we no longer are a publishing arm. So we turned our publishing to a just-in-time, where people can actually order as they need and not have to load a lot of books on the shelves that they may not need and have dollars wrapped up in. With that, we provide all of our curriculum at cost.
Very good.
And so whatever the shipping is and the printing is, generally our most of our literature is between $2.50 and $5.
Very good.
A book. Prison ministry in itself is hard enough. We don't want to preclude anybody because of cost. So we've tried to pass that along as best as we can.
And people can fit it right into the ministry they have, which is one of the things I really like about what you have developed there.
Yeah, that's what makes it nice. If you're already doing prison ministry and you already have those entry relationships built, this is just a tool. It's a niche that you can add that, if you're looking for a tool that built on reconciliation and then built on family values, it's something you can incorporate into the things you're already doing.
Well, let's take some phone calls because we have quite a number that would like to chat with you. So we'll go first to Georgia. Tanner, listening on WPWB. And Tanner, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for the opportunity. All I was really going to say is I've worked with Kairos Prison Ministries in Georgia, and they have groups in other states and other countries as well. I think the greatest thing I've noticed, though, is like our program is an introduction to Christ. It's a 3-day program, and then we have monthly follow-ups, but the lack of materials that the inmates have besides just the Bible, study materials and so on, is pretty glaring, and it's hard for them to get those things because they don't have any real money to spend on purchasing anything in the first place. So those are the two areas that I had seen. That, and once they get out, there's still that kind of standoff approach that a lot of folks have towards convicted felons, when the fact is, even one of the gentlemen I ran into or met a long time ago, it was truly a God-given story where he was convicted of a double murder, no parole, no chance of no parole, and simply God transformed his heart from the inside out, and he's now an associate pastor in Athens, Georgia.
What a
and
great
was
story.
released.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And has a great testimony of the transformation God can do to our heart and soul, through the study of the Word, though. But he got started through Kairos, but that's not where it stopped. He had just an absolute thirst to know as much as he could about God and what God could do for people, and then to share that with others now.
Well, Tanner, appreciate you sharing that. And again, what a great success story, if nothing else. So, again, that would be something that people can fit within their ministry. Let's head out to Ohio this time. WGGN. Jamie, thank you for joining us on Point of View today.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I was actually just calling in to be an encouragement to those out there who may want to get involved. I am a former inmate. I just did 5 years in Ohio Reformatory for Women. And while there, I was able to get involved in praise dancing and stuff. And as the previous caller mentioned, Kairos, that was a major impact on my spiritual life. And it was such a blessing. And the women in there are so deprived of touch and love. And there is such a standstill in their life that they will eat up any affection, and the best affection is God. And I just think we need more of it out there, because these women are at a time in their life where they can't write that text no more, and they have to make a decision in their life. And it's a lot easier to make the right decision when you have that encouragement there with you at that time in your life when you're at your lowest. So if anyone listening out there feels they have anything to offer, run with it, because it is very much needed in the prison system today. And that's all I wanted to say.
No, thank you for that.
And thank you for your own testimony. What a great story. Go ahead.
One of the things that I would just add to that is that, the church has done such a fabulous job of absorbing and reaching out on so many different sin issues. But certainly we have a lot more to give, and a lot more growth is needed when it relates to those that are incarcerated. So I empathize with your call there, and also join in on the encouragement to get others involved.
Very good. Well, I think a few of the other callers want to say that, so let's head out to the state of California this time. Sylvia, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, it's wonderful to hear the other speakers speak about Kairos, and it's spelled K-A-I-R-O-S, and it's Kairos Prison Ministry International. It's in Europe, it's even in Africa. And there's 3 parts to Kairos Prison Ministry. It's Kairos Inside for men and women who are incarcerated, and a team of different denominations or no denomination, people with Christian value, that believe in the Lord, will come together and they form a team. They form a team for 6 months, and then they go inside to tell their stories. And it's amazing the transformation that you can see from Friday to Sunday in every single person. I mean, even the guards and even in us to serve. And then there's a second part, is that's what I'm mainly involved in, and well, actually both of them, prison outside. And that's for women who have a loved one incarcerated, male, female, brother, whatever, whomever, and they get to go on a free day. This is all free retreat weekend for women to go inside and have a 3-day weekend, so they can know that they're not alone, and that they know how to support and love the person on the inside, as well as heal for themselves on the outside, because they form community in the small groups from the Kairos weekend. And that is so beautiful. Then we have Kairos, that's Kairos outside. Now we have Kairos Torch. And there's, in California, we only have 3 California youth authorities. 2 are in Stockton, where I live in California, and the other one's in Ventura. Okay, so that's where the boys are all at, and the boys have heavy time. Some of them have, one young man had so much time, and he was getting ready to leave for the big prison after he turned 23. And I remember looking at his eyes, and he looked so sad as we were going to pray for him as he was going to do his time. And I looked at him and I go, what have you learned on the Torch weekend? Remember, you learned about God, you were introduced to him, you know about Jesus, and what did we bring to you? We brought you love. What makes you think that your God doesn't have a purpose and a plan for you? What makes you think that rules and laws cannot be changed, and that you can change continuously as it moves on? He just started looking at me.
What a great testimony and on all that. We're coming to a break, so I didn't want to lose all of the opportunity here to hear from a couple of the other listeners. But, she was talking about something that I thought you might mention as well, and that is, first of all, international. You are going to be actually getting on an airplane pretty quickly and doing an international outreach for this too, aren't you?
Yeah, actually, from this trip, I am leaving for Rwanda, Kigali, Rwanda. We actually we are in quite a few countries around the globe right now. Within the next 6 months, we'll be active in 19 countries total. But our purpose of going to Kigali is we've got 45 pastors that are from Eastern and Southern Africa that are all meeting in a centralized, just a little bit more efficient and economical for us to meet there, as opposed to trying to bring everybody here. But yeah, we're just really excited. We've got some new opportunities with some partners in Romania that are opening up, and in northern India, and so we're just real excited about the way that God's using our ministry.
And Chief, talking about California, as I understand, aren't you also working in the Los Angeles prison system? Isn't that the largest system in the country?
Yeah, we're hands-on in Los Angeles. We probably have our deepest roots in both Louisiana and California. Those tend to be the foundation of the other 30 states that we're involved with, but we actively teach both Malachi Dad's and Hannah's Gift and those inmates, and the storyline that we get from those places. It's just, I could take up your next 5 shows with just the storyline that comes from there.
Well, I see one of our callers has actually worked with Malachi Dad, so we'll talk about that next. Someone else has worked in the prison system, wants to encourage others. So we will take one of those mandatory breaks and come back and hear a few more of those stories. And if you would like to know a little bit more, of course, we have a link to Lifeline Global. Simply go to pointofview.net or go directly there, and we'll come back and continue our conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Mark in Texas. Mark, I understand you've had a chance to work with Malachi Dads. Tell us more.
Volume control, master control, voice command.
Okay. Are you with us? I'm not sure what that is. Let's go on to Millie in Georgia. Millie, what would you like to add to our conversation as well?
Yes, good afternoon. I wanted to say that I was a teacher in the prison system here in Georgia for 30 years, and the worst day of my life was when I retired out because my body just wouldn't do it anymore. But I wanted to say what an encouragement it was to see the ministries come. There were many different ones that came in, and most of those you've already named. And I wanted to also add that frequently, the people who would come in with them as a community effort and county support or whatever came back. And when those people retired from whatever jobs they had, pastors or whatever they were doing, and had more time, they came back and visited the inmates and became friends and helped in many ways to do a personal support for them. Now, that had a big impact on my life because as a teacher, I wanted those students to improve, and they were all very dejected, as has already been said, and they needed a boost. And friendship helped. Many times, many of them came to know the Lord, but this is a fact that's true in the prison system. When an inmate begins to show improvement in many different areas, especially education, the parole board looks favorably upon their records and upon their improvements, and that helps them many times to have adjusted time rates.
Yes.
Okay. So what I would really like to say is many different times I'm walking here now that I'm retired through Kroger or Walmart or somewhere, and I'll feel a little tap on my shoulder, and there will be a man standing with a lady and maybe some children, and he will stand there with tears in his eyes and thank me for the encouragement and the witness that I was able to give in the system. You can't preach and you can't stand in there as a paid employee, but I could answer any question they had, and I had a Bible on my desk. So the questions came out, and we talked. And it's just been such a blessing for me to be there, but the wonderful blessing was to see the morale lift. And when those guys began to feel better about themselves, not only their education, but began to have hope, then they contacted their families, they wrote letters, and their families were reunited. And that's how it's been for me when around here. I see them, and I see, God's hand upon all of this work. So it's a together thing. We all work together, but people need to go in there and realize they're just people too, and they need to hear from people that will believe in them or listen to them, help them write a letter, help them think of a word they need to put somewhere to say to someone, encourage them, help them with their homework, by the way. And if there's anybody out there that is a teacher or who would like to volunteer or who would like to can't find a job where they are, or they feel like they're frustrated with the education programs wherever they are, because that's happening a lot, look into helping at a prison because there's so much need. And my heart is there. And I thank you for this program and for all of the things that you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the questions that maybe people are going to have, Romney, is what happens when they get out? Because, you have a program in the prison, but you have all sorts of other things for them returning back to society too, don't you?
Well, I think what you're talking about is our Returning Hearts program.
Yes.
And our Returning Hearts program is really a celebration for the graduates. And so it takes inmates that have gone through our program and have fully graduated from that. And it's a one-day festival that brings back families, especially children, and allows mom or dad to engage their sons or daughters, share the love of Christ, seek reconciliation, ask for forgiveness, and really start, in some cases, start rebuilding those bonds. It started when they were students, but, in some cases, just depending on the situation, it might be the first time that, they've actually been able to hold mom or dad. It's I can tell you that I've had the opportunity to been blessed to do ministry all over the world in really some impoverished areas. And while all those been blessed by all those experiences, I've never been as moved as I have been going to Returning Hearts. I mean, it's just, certainly what society sees as a criminal element, these children see as daddy.
And one of the things we've talked about before with Gene Getz is the Life Essentials Bible that sometimes is available to individuals. So there are just some great resources that are available. But again, let's, if we can, just talk about, before we run out of time here, what people will find when they land on the website. Again, you can click on the picture there of Romney, and that is lifelineglobal.org. And let me go back to Mark. We had trouble connecting up with him in just a minute ago, but I think you wanted to give a testimony of Malachi dads. What would you like to add?
Yeah, I worked with a guy named Grove Norwood from the inception of Malachi Dads. We were doing it in a prison called Darrington, which also has a full-blown seminary for inmates. And what we found was, what I would say the remarkable things was, as we connected dads up with their kids, we were watching transformations on both sides, but we saw equally remarkable transformation on the part of the mentors, the volunteers.
Wow.
We had men who walked into prison scared spitless as they walked in there and heard those big doors close. And after one night, there is more of Christ in the meetings that we have with Malachi Dads than any church I've ever seen. We have guys with tattoos on them that are threatening to kill the guy that they're hugging while they pray for him.
Mm-hmm. Just unbelievable. So again, just an incredible impact of Malachi Dads. But when people land on the website, let's talk about what's available and how people get started.
Yeah. So, again, it really depends on what you want to come in with. Certainly it can be as simple as, hey, I just want to ease into this. I'm going to commit, the next 12 weeks. I've got a group of people that are willing to commit with me, and they're going to take that step of faith and they're going to facilitate at least one book. But as the previous caller said, most of our volunteers, as he related, the transformation process just isn't with the student or the children. And in fact, that cross-cultural relationship that a lot of people taking that step out in faith, they're moved as well. But it's as simple as allocating that time and day of week. But what ends up happening typically is what starts off as one class manifests itself into multiple classes and then multiple years. One of the things that you'll find is that our graduates, if they continue to stay behind bars, actually become mentors and then become instructors and teachers that will join in you in that. So. And just really wanted to, you had mentioned our relationship with Gene Getz, Dr. Getz and his ministries. I just really wanted to give a shout out to what a great partnership that is that we have the benefit that all of our graduates now receive a Lifeline Study Bible from Dr. Getz's ministry.
Perfect.
And so what a blessing that is.
Yes. Well, again, we're out of time, but if you would like to know more, simply go to lifelineglobal.org. And Romney, it's just been great to have you in studio. We've been following this for some time, and it's just great to get an update. And it was great to hear from some of these people doing prison ministry already.
We certainly appreciate it. Pleasure being here.
That's all we have for today. Don't forget that tomorrow is our weekend edition. We'll get back into a lot of the issues in the news, and certainly that is the case. But if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know more about that curriculum, I'd like to watch a few of the videos, just simply go to our website, pointofview.net, or you can click directly at lifelineglobal.org and you'll find all the information that you need. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.